I think a spiritual journey goes on hand in hand with an environmental one, which I guess has got me personally to an understanding that life is about service. You know, we're blessed to have this farm, and it's so how do we use this for the greater good? It's a traditional sheep and cattle farm. It's 610 hectares or 1,500 acres and has been farmed, traditionally with sheep and cattle since about 1850s. It's back about 15 years ago when we had our first child that you started thinking about the future. You start thinking about the food that you're giving your children, and that sort of led us on a journey to find a more sustainable, regenerative way of looking after our property and also looking after the future. That journey has led us to learn about organic agriculture, biodynamics, biological agriculture, and have made some pretty big changes on the farm over the last 10 years. Back in 2008, we approached Air New Zealand with an idea for people to be able to use air points to donate to an environmental tree planting project. And we're just at the right place and the right time, and very fortunate to get some funding from the Air New Zealand Environment Trust. And over a 3-year period, we planted 85,000 trees. The majority of those are New Zealand native trees, which are now flourishing and really transforming the landscape. And we've also planted a lot of nut trees and fruit trees where we can, just to create that abundance and vibrancy in the farm. And I guess one of the catch cries for the farm is diversity, 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 and as much as possible we're creating that diversity. We've got the cattle going around. We have hens following along behind the cattle. There's pigs on this farm too, and we're milking a few dairy cows, and all that is really about using a perennial crop like grass, pasture with forage from trees and that around as well, without relying on so much of the annual grains and all the energy that's involved in producing them. One of the biggest changes that we've made has been reducing our sheep numbers and getting more cattle onto the farm. And that's because we're moving to a system of holistic grazing. So holistic grazing is a management technique that's been devised by a Zimbabwean man, Alan Savory, and he was observing the large herds of buffalo in Africa, and could be bison in America, and just massive herds of ruminant animals. And these animals were constantly on the move because there's generally some lions or something just on their back and wanting to pick off any of the weak ones. And so our system that we've adapted, the holistic grazing based from the Alan Savory thing, is we like to have large mobs of cattle, and we're shifting them daily, and so they're constantly on the move. But instead of lions, keeping them bunched together, we have electric fences, and each day they're going onto fresh grass, and it's long grass, and so they're not eating it all. Some of it's getting trampled, and with the dung and urine and that, and with the grass being trampled, it creates a mulch on the surface. And I guess it's like kind of making a compost right in situ on the land, and with a healthy soil biology that will break down and form humus in the soil. Conventionally, farmers, it's all about keeping the grass short in a vegetative state, so it's growing vigorously. Through that whole process, you're actually degrading the soil and just topping it up with fertiliser inputs. And that system relies on bringing in particularly phosphate fertilisers, largely from North Africa, and a whole system that requires digging up that fertiliser and trucking it and then shipping it and then trucking it and then processing it and then flying it onto hills. It's a system that's not going to work in a future with less fossil fuels. Other farmers might be looking at us and saying, well, you're just wasting all that grass because it gets dry and stalky and what have you. But my reply is that waste is a human concept. Nature doesn't do waste. And so we are using that pasture as part of our fertiliser program, because that's what's getting put down on the soil and broken down and going back into building soil. When the grass is grazed under the holistic long grazing system, it gets cut off short by the animal, and it also sheds its roots at that time. And so that's how you're increasing the carbon into the soil. And I guess one of the most exciting things and drivers of what we're doing is the potential that has for helping with climate change issues. And the potential for getting carbon from the atmosphere down into the soil is an absolute must. Despite so many websites and environmental groups saying how damaging cattle are, and the way they are farmed conventionally, it's absolutely right, through feedlot systems and all the cropping and energy involved with bringing their food, and then the issues with their wastes and manure, it is a big issue. Under this system, they are sequestering more carbon and are part of a natural cycle that is actually beneficial. Although I don't obviously have all the answers, one observation is that there are no vegetarian ecosystems, and so animals are part of nature, and so it is a whole lot more balance that we need to put into our food system, and cattle can be part of that. I totally accept if for whatever spiritual reasons or whatever people choose not to eat animals, respect their decision to do that. But for me, there is no life without death, and it's how we look after the animals. All life is sacred to us, and so we honour these animals by giving them a fantastic life, looking after them the best we can, and then I guess at the end of the day, to justify killing one of these beautiful creatures, we have to live a good life and do the right thing too to honour that animal. We're not concentrating on optimising our production or profitability. Our focus is to optimise life, and I think the profitability will come as a consequence of that. New Zealand, being probably one of the youngest countries, on the planet as far as, when humans came to be here, I just sort of would love to see what this place looked like 1,000 years ago, which is such a, brief period in ecological time. And in that time, we've sort of stripped most of the native vegetation and done a whole lot of damage. And we've gone about as far as we can down that road. And so now it's time for us to try and find the balance and restore those ecosystems, but find a place for humans living harmoniously within it. Ultimately, it's all about trying to restore paradise. Nitrogen fixing trees and shade, shelter, all that sort of stuff. Is that a bumblebee?
It is a bumblebee.
Excuse me.
Very friendly.
We like nature.
Yeah.
Hey there guys, thanks for watching. If you want to see more of our films, you can check out these two here, or if you want to help support us in making more films, you can visit our Patreon page. There's a link to it in the description. So thanks again for watching, and I'll see you all in the next film.